I worked as a security guard in my own company for 6 months. No one knew I was the real owner, the billionaire who disappeared. My name is Adrian Hayes, and 6 months ago, I made the craziest decision of my life. I walked into my own company wearing a cheap security guard uniform. No one recognized me. Not the executives. Not the managers. Not even the employees whose salaries I personally paid every month. To them, I was just another middle-aged security guard named Adam. Invisible. Forgettable. Easy to ignore. Exactly what I wanted. Because after inheriting one of America's largest technology companies, I discovered something that terrified me. The numbers were perfect. The profits were breaking records. The stock price was climbing every quarter. But people were leaving. Our best engineers were resigning. Our longest-serving employees were quitting. Customer complaints had doubled. Anonymous letters kept arriving on my desk. Every one of them carried the same message. You don't know what's happening inside your own company. At first, I thought they were exaggerating. I was wrong. Very wrong. 3 years earlier, I never expected to become a billionaire. My father, Richard Hayes, founded Hayes Technologies in a small garage outside Chicago. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a builder. He believed that companies weren't built by CEOs. They were built by ordinary people who showed up every day and did extraordinary work. He often told me, the janitor who unlocks the building every morning is just as important as the man sitting in the boardroom. Those words stayed with me my entire life. When I graduated from Stanford, I could have accepted offers from almost any major tech company. Instead, I chose to work for my father. Not because I had to, because I wanted to earn my place. For 7 years, I worked in different departments. Customer support, sales, product development, even shipping. Most employees had no idea who I was. Dad insisted on it. If they treat you well because of your last name, he said, you'll never know who they really are. Then everything changed. One cold November morning, my father collapsed during a board meeting. A massive heart attack. The doctors tried everything. He never regained consciousness. He was 68 years old. At his funeral, thousands of employees came to say goodbye. Some cried harder than family members. That's when I realized something. My father hadn't built a company. He had built a family. I promised myself I would protect it, no matter what it cost. A week after the funeral, I officially became CEO. The board welcomed me warmly. Investors applauded. The media called me America's youngest tech billionaire CEO. But there was one man who didn't seem happy. Victor Lang, our chief operating officer. He had worked beside my father for nearly 20 years. Most people expected him to become CEO after Dad passed away. Instead, the position came to me. Victor smiled whenever cameras were around. But when we were alone, his smile disappeared. The first few months were exhausting. Meetings, interviews, investor conferences, product launches, everything demanded my attention. I trusted Victor to handle daily operations. After all, my father had trusted him. Then strange things started happening. Employee satisfaction dropped dramatically. Anonymous complaints filled the human resources department. Several loyal managers resigned without explanation. Whenever I asked Victor about it, he always had an answer. People don't like change. It's just temporary. Everything is under control. But something didn't feel right. One afternoon, my assistant placed a plain, white envelope on my desk. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, Mr. Hayes, you think your company is succeeding. Come and see how ordinary employees are treated. If you walk in as the owner, everyone will lie. If you walk in as nobody, you'll finally see the truth. No signature. No name. I read it 5 times. Then I locked it inside my desk. Over the next month, 3 more letters arrived. Different handwriting. Different envelopes. Same message. Someone inside the company wanted me to see something, but they were too afraid to say it openly. That frightened me more than the letters themselves. Fear spreads only when people stop believing they'll be protected. One evening, I drove to my father's old house. Even after his death, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. His office looked exactly the same. The books, the photographs, the old wooden desk, everything. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay a leather notebook I'd never seen before. On the first page, in my father's handwriting, were 6 simple words. Never trust reports. Trust people. As I turned the pages, I realized it wasn't a diary. It was a journal of observations. Whenever Dad visited one of our offices, he wrote about the employees he met. The security guards, receptionists, cleaners, maintenance workers. He knew all of them by name. He even remembered their children's birthdays. At the end of the notebook, one sentence was underlined 3 times. If you ever lose touch with your people, you've already lost your company. I closed the notebook slowly. That night, I made a decision no billionaire had ever made. The following Monday, I called only one person. My personal attorney, Margaret Ellis. When she entered my office, I closed the door. I need your help. She smiled. Legal problem? No. I want to disappear. Her smile vanished. What? I want everyone to believe I've taken a 6-month medical leave. She stared at me. Adrian, what are you planning? I took a deep breath. I'm going undercover. 3 weeks later, the media announced that I was taking an extended leave from public life after suffering from severe exhaustion. Investors accepted the explanation. The board approved Victor as acting CEO. Only 3 people knew the truth. Margaret, my father's oldest friend, Thomas, and me. A professional makeup artist changed my appearance. My hair was cut short and dyed gray. A light beard was added. I wore glasses with plain lenses. Even my posture changed. Instead of expensive Italian suits, I wore a faded blue security uniform with a plastic name tag. Adam Parker, security officer. Salary, $18 an hour. On a rainy Monday morning, I walked through the employee entrance of Hayes Technologies. No limousine, no private elevator, no assistants, just a lunchbox in one hand, and a flashlight hanging from my belt. The hiring manager barely looked at me. First day. Yes, sir. Locker rooms downstairs. Don't be late. That was it. No special treatment. No respect. No recognition. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't Adrian Hayes. I was just another security guard. And before the end of my very first day, I would witness something that would change everything I thought I knew about my father's company. The truth hidden behind the glass walls. The first thing I learned as a security guard was something no board meeting had ever taught me. People never show their true character to the CEO, but they reveal everything to someone they believe doesn't matter. And to everyone inside Hayes Technologies, I didn't matter. My first shift started at 6 o'clock the next morning. The sun hadn't even risen yet. The lobby, usually filled with executives in expensive suits, was almost empty. Only a handful of employees arrived that early. Cleaning staff, maintenance workers, receptionists, delivery drivers, the people who kept the company running before anyone else walked through the doors. An older janitor smiled as he pushed his cleaning cart past me. Morning, kid. I smiled back. Morning. He laughed. You'll learn something about this place. What's that? The people wearing the cheapest uniforms usually work the hardest. His name was Frank Miller. He had worked for my father for 28 years. Yet I had never met him. That realization hurt more than I expected. Around 8 o'clock, the executives began arriving. Luxury cars pulled into the underground parking garage. One by one, they entered the building. Some nodded politely at me. Others walked past as though I were invisible. Then a black Mercedes stopped in front of the entrance. Victor Lang stepped out. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect image. As he walked toward the lobby, I held the door open. He didn't even look at me. Not a single word. No, thank you. Nothing. The man who smiled at every investor couldn't spare 1 second for the person opening the door. I quietly wrote his name in a small notebook I kept inside my pocket. That notebook became my greatest weapon. Every day, I wrote everything down. Who respected people, who abused their authority, who lied, who helped, who ignored. Small moments reveal big truths. 3 days later, I witnessed my first shock. A young receptionist named Emma Collins accidentally spilled coffee on the floor just as Victor entered the lobby. It wasn't even near him. But he stopped, turned toward her, and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. Do you people enjoy embarrassing this company? Emma immediately apologized. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lang. It won't happen again. Victor stepped closer. It better not. If you're this careless with coffee, I wonder how careless you are with customer information. Tears filled Emma's eyes. She couldn't have been older than 23. Victor walked away without another word. The entire lobby became silent. No one defended her. Everyone simply lowered their heads. After he disappeared into the elevator, I quietly handed Emma a box of tissues. You okay? She forced a smile. I'm used to it. Those 4 words stayed with me all day. I'm used to it. That evening, I called Margaret from a payphone outside the building. Everything okay? She asked. No. It's worse than I imagined. What happened? I've been here 3 days. And already people are afraid. She remained silent. Then she asked, what are you going to do? Nothing. Not yet. If I act too early, I'll only catch one guilty person. I want all of them. The following week, I was assigned to the executive floor. Officially, my job was to monitor visitors. Unofficially, it gave me the perfect opportunity to observe everything. One afternoon, I heard shouting inside a conference room. The door suddenly opened. A software engineer walked out carrying a cardboard box. He looked devastated. Victor followed behind him. You're finished. The engineer stopped walking. I gave this company 12 years. Victor shrugged. And now you're unemployed? The man looked ready to cry. My daughter is having surgery next month. I need the health insurance. Victor didn't even blink. That's no longer my problem. The engineer quietly picked up his box and walked toward the elevator. As he passed me, I noticed something. His employee badge showed 15 service awards. 12 years of loyalty, gone in less than 2 minutes. That night, I searched his personnel file. His name was Michael Turner. Performance reviews, outstanding. Disciplinary record, none. Reason for termination, cost reduction. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The company had reported record profits that quarter. There had been no financial crisis. Michael hadn't been fired because the company needed money. He had been fired because someone wanted bigger bonuses. 2 weeks into my undercover mission, I met someone extraordinary. Her name was Sarah Bennett. She worked in customer support. Most executives never noticed her, but every employee knew her. Every morning, she brought homemade muffins for the cleaning staff. She secretly paid for lunch whenever an intern couldn't afford it. She stayed late helping new employees without asking for overtime. One afternoon, I saw her give her own winter coat to an elderly homeless woman outside the building. When she returned inside wearing only a thin sweater, I asked, "Aren't you cold?" She smiled. She needed it more. Simple. Honest. Exactly the kind of employee my father loved. I wrote another name in my notebook. Sarah Bennett. Not everyone was kind. A middle manager named Kevin Brooks treated security guards like servants. Every morning he ordered us to carry his coffee, fetch his dry cleaning, reserve parking spaces that weren't assigned to him. One afternoon he tossed his car keys at me without even looking. "Wash it before I leave." I caught the keys. "I'm sorry, sir. We're security. We don't wash cars." He smirked. "You do whatever I tell you." Before I could answer, Frank, the elderly janitor, quietly stepped between us. "He isn't your assistant." Kevin glared at Frank. "And who asked you?" Frank smiled. "No one. I just don't like bullies." Kevin stormed away. I looked at Frank. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "Your uniform doesn't decide your worth." Those words sounded exactly like something my father would have said. As the weeks passed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Employees weren't afraid of making mistakes. They were afraid of management. Departments competed against each other instead of working together. Managers took credit for ideas that junior employees created. Promotions weren't earned. They were bought through loyalty to Victor. The culture my father had spent 30 years building was disappearing. Then something happened that confirmed my worst fears. It was nearly midnight. I was finishing my final security round when I noticed lights inside the finance department. No one should have been there. I quietly walked toward the office. The door wasn't completely closed. Through the narrow opening, I saw Victor and Chief Financial Officer Daniel Ross standing beside a shredder. Boxes of financial documents surrounded them. Daniel looked nervous. "Are you sure we should destroy these?" Victor's voice was cold. "They'll only create unnecessary questions." "What if Adrian comes back sooner than expected?" Victor smiled. "He won't. And even if he does, he'll see exactly what I want him to see. Daniel hesitated. But these are original contracts. Victor's face hardened. Destroy them. Tonight. My heart started pounding. Why would they destroy company records? What were they trying to hide? I carefully reached into my pocket and switched on the tiny voice recorder Margaret had insisted I carry. Every word, every order, every threat was being recorded. I didn't know it yet, but those few minutes of audio would become the first crack in the empire Victor had spent years building. And for the first time since putting on that security uniform, I realized this wasn't just about toxic leadership anymore. It was about something much darker. Something illegal. The people worth fighting for. That recording changed everything. For weeks, I had suspected something was wrong. Now, I knew it. Victor Lang wasn't simply running my father's company into the ground. He was covering his tracks, destroying evidence. And if he was willing to destroy company records, what else was he hiding? The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I stood in the lobby, greeting employees with a smile. Inside, my mind was racing. I couldn't confront Victor. Not yet. One recording wasn't enough. If I wanted justice, I needed proof that no lawyer could explain away. So I waited, and I watched. A few days later, I met someone who reminded me of my father. His name was David Morales. He worked in the warehouse. He had been with Hayes Technologies for almost 18 years. Every employee respected him. Whenever someone needed help moving equipment, David was there. Whenever an intern got lost, David personally showed them around. He treated everyone exactly the same. CEO or janitor. It didn't matter. One afternoon I asked him, "Why have you stayed here so long?" He smiled. "Because this company used to feel like home." Used to? His smile disappeared. Everything changed after Mr. Richard passed away. I stayed quiet. He continued. He knew every employee's name. If someone's child was sick, he called. If someone lost a family member, he attended the funeral. He built this place with respect. David looked around to make sure no manager was nearby. Now, people are afraid to speak. That sentence stayed in my mind all day. People weren't leaving because of money. They were leaving because they had lost hope. 2 weeks later, another anonymous letter appeared inside my locker. This time there was no envelope, just a folded piece of paper. It read, "You're looking in the wrong department. Follow the executive bonuses. Someone is stealing millions while employees lose their jobs." No signature. No fingerprints. Nothing. Whoever was helping me clearly knew the company very well. But they were terrified of being discovered. That night I called Margaret. "I've got another lead." "What is it?" "Executive bonuses." She was silent for a moment. "That's interesting." "Why?" "Because according to the reports, there weren't any executive bonuses this year." I frowned. "What?" "The board approved a salary freeze." A cold feeling spread through my body. If bonuses officially didn't exist, then where was the money going? The following Monday, something unexpected happened. Sarah Bennett from customer support found a wallet in the cafeteria. Inside was nearly $4,000 in cash. Several employees gathered around her. One whispered, "Keep it. No one will know." Another laughed. "Think of it as a bonus." Sarah closed the wallet. "No. It belongs to someone." She spent almost 2 hours searching the building. Eventually, she found the owner, a frightened maintenance worker named Carlos. The money belonged to his wife. It was supposed to pay for emergency surgery the next morning. When Carlos opened the wallet, every dollar was still there. He broke down crying. Sarah simply smiled. "I'm just glad I found you." I stood nearby pretending to check security cameras. Inside, I was smiling. People like Sarah were the reason my father built Hayes Technologies. That evening, I wrote another page inside my notebook. Employees to protect. Sarah Bennett, David Morales, Frank Miller, Emma Collins, Carlos Ramirez. Beside each name, I wrote one sentence. Future leaders, not because of their job titles, because of their character. 3 months passed. By then, no one questioned my presence anymore. I had become part of the background. People spoke freely around me. Managers ignored me. Executives barely noticed I existed. Exactly what I wanted. One afternoon, while checking cameras near the executive parking garage, I overheard Kevin Brooks talking on the phone. I already changed the performance reports. He laughed. No! The CEO isn't coming back. Victor will approve everything. He paused. The promotion is mine. I immediately turned on my recorder. Kevin continued, We'll blame the missing money on budget restructuring. Missing money? My pulse quickened. How many people were involved? That night, Marcus Chin arrived. Marcus wasn't just an old friend. He was one of the best cybersecurity experts in the country. Only Margaret knew he was secretly helping me. We met inside a small coffee shop across the street. After listening to the recordings, Marcus leaned forward. This isn't random corruption. What do you mean? This is organized. Several departments are working together. He pulled out his laptop. I've been monitoring public financial filings. He turned the screen toward me. There are payments going to companies that don't actually exist. Shell companies, fake invoices, millions of dollars. Someone inside Hayes Technologies had created an invisible pipeline. Money was leaving the company every month. No one noticed, because every report looked perfectly legal. Marcus looked at me seriously. Your father didn't build a company. Someone turned it into a bank. A week later, the annual Employee Appreciation Day arrived. My father had started the tradition 25 years earlier. Every employee received a bonus. Families were invited. Children toured the offices. It was always his favorite day of the year. This year, Victor canceled almost everything. No unnecessary expenses. That's what his email said. Instead of a celebration, employees received cheap box lunches. No bonuses. No family event. Nothing. As I watched disappointed workers quietly eat in the cafeteria, I remembered my father's words. Never save money by taking hope away from people. Victor had done exactly that. Late that afternoon, something happened that made my blood boil. Frank, the 70-year-old janitor, accidentally slipped while carrying cleaning supplies. He fell hard onto the marble floor. Several employees rushed to help him. Before anyone could react, Kevin Brooks shouted, Who's going to clean this mess? Not, Are you okay? Not, Call an ambulance. His first concern was the floor. I walked over immediately. Together with David and Sarah, we helped Frank into a chair. His hands were shaking. I think I hurt my ankle. Kevin rolled his eyes. Great. Now we're short one janitor. That was the moment I almost ended my undercover mission. Every instinct inside me wanted to tell Kevin exactly who I was. I wanted security to escort him out. I wanted the board to fire him that same afternoon. But I remembered my father's notebook. Never punish one bad person before discovering all the others. So, I stayed silent. That evening, I visited Frank in the hospital. He looked surprised to see me. You didn't have to come. I wanted to. He smiled. You remind me of someone. Who? Mr. Richard. He used to visit employees in the hospital. He never told the newspapers. He just came. I looked down at the floor. For the first time since my father died, someone had compared me to him. It meant more than they would ever know. As I left the hospital, my phone vibrated. It was Marcus. His voice sounded urgent. Adrian, I found it. What? The hidden accounts. And you're not going to believe whose name is connected to them. Who? There was a long pause. Finally, Marcus spoke. Victor isn't the mastermind. I stopped walking. What are you talking about? Someone above him has been pulling the strings all along. The line went silent. My heart began pounding. I had spent months believing Victor was the biggest threat. I was wrong. He wasn't the king. He was only a piece on the board, and the real enemy had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The man behind the curtain. I couldn't sleep that night. Marcus's last words echoed in my head. Victor isn't the mastermind. 4 months, I had believed Victor Lang was the man destroying my father's company. Now I had discovered something even more terrifying. Someone else, someone even more powerful, was pulling the strings. But who? There were only 12 members on the board of directors. Most of them had worked with my father for decades. I had trusted every one of them. Maybe that had been my biggest mistake. The next morning, I arrived at work 30 minutes early. The building was almost empty. As I checked security cameras, I noticed something unusual. Every Tuesday at exactly 6:45 a.m., Victor entered the building alone. No assistant, no driver, no secretary. He always went directly to the executive conference room. Today, I decided to follow him. Keeping a safe distance, I watched him unlock the conference room. He looked around carefully before stepping inside. 5 minutes later, another man entered. I recognized him immediately. Charles Whitmore, chairman of the board. He had been my father's closest business partner for nearly 25 years. The man who had held my hand at my father's funeral. The man who had promised, "Your father built a great company. I'll help you protect it." My heart sank. What was he doing here before sunrise? I quietly moved closer. The conference room door wasn't completely shut. Their voices drifted into the hallway. Charles spoke first. "Has Adrian contacted anyone?" Victor shook his head. "No. He still believes the company is safe." Charles smiled. "Good. We only need another 3 months." Victor looked nervous. "What about the audit?" "I've delayed it again." "And the missing money?" Charles laughed softly. "No one audits success. Investors only care about profits." My hands tightened into fists. So it was true. Victor wasn't acting alone. The chairman himself was involved. Then Charles said something that froze my blood. "When Adrian's 6-month leave ends, we'll convince the board to remove him permanently." Victor looked surprised. "On what grounds?" Charles calmly replied, "Incompetence. We'll tell investors he abandoned the company, and they'll elect a new CEO." Victor smiled. "You?" Charles slowly shook his head. "No. You." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then they both laughed. The sound made me sick. I quietly stepped away before anyone noticed me. As soon as I reached the parking garage, I called Margaret. She answered immediately. "Did something happen?" "I know who's behind everything." "Who?" "Charles Whitmore." Silence. Then she whispered, "No. He was Richard's best friend." "I know. And that's exactly why no one suspects him." That afternoon, Margaret met Marcus and me at a small cafe. I played the recording. Neither of them spoke until it ended. Finally, Marcus leaned back. "This changes everything." Margaret nodded. "Victor follows orders. Charles gives them." I looked at both of them. "So how do we stop him?" Marcus smiled. "We don't. We let him finish his plan." I frowned. "What?" "The bigger the crime, the harder it is to escape." The next several weeks became the hardest of my life. Every day, I watched good people suffer. Emma, the young receptionist, was denied a promotion because she refused to falsify customer reports. David, the warehouse supervisor, was threatened after questioning missing inventory. Sarah, the kind customer support representative, received a warning for helping elderly customers too long on phone calls. According to management, compassion was bad for productivity. Every day, my father's company looked less like his dream, and more like a prison. One Friday afternoon, Sarah approached me in the lobby. "Adam, can I ask you something?" "Of course." She smiled nervously. "You've worked in a lot of places." "A few." "Do companies always become like this?" "What do you mean?" She looked around before speaking. "I used to love coming to work. Now everyone is scared. Nobody laughs anymore. I don't even recognize this place." I didn't know what to say, because she was right. The building still carried my father's name, but his spirit had disappeared. That evening, something unexpected happened. As I was leaving the building, Frank stopped me. "I've got something for you." He handed me an old photograph. I looked at it. It showed my father standing beside dozens of employees during the company's 10th anniversary. Everyone was smiling. Everyone. Frank pointed toward the picture. "You see that?" I nodded. Mr. Richard knew every single person's name in this photo. There were almost 400 employees. He memorized every one. Frank smiled. "That's why we'd have followed him anywhere." I stared at my father's face. For the first time, I realized my undercover mission wasn't really about exposing corruption. It was about rebuilding what he had created. 3 days later, Marcus called. I hacked into the backup accounting servers. "Find anything?" He laughed. "I found everything." Within minutes, he sent encrypted files to my laptop. Millions of dollars had been transferred into shell companies, luxury homes, private islands, offshore accounts. Everything eventually led back to one name. Charles Whitmore. The total amount stolen over 5 years. $286 million. I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't looking at corruption anymore. I was looking at one of the biggest corporate thefts in American history. The next morning, Victor made a fatal mistake. He called every department manager into the executive conference room. As security, I was assigned outside the door. Perfect. Inside, Victor addressed the managers. Listen carefully. Mr. Hayes returns in 2 weeks. If anyone speaks to him about company operations, you're fired immediately. One manager hesitated. What if he asks questions directly? Victor smiled coldly. You tell him exactly what we've prepared. Prepared? So they had rehearsed lies. Every manager received a folder. Inside were false financial reports, fake employee satisfaction surveys, forged audit summaries. They weren't just hiding corruption. They were planning to deceive me personally. Fortunately, I recorded every word. That night, Marcus looked at me and smiled. They've done it. What? They've committed conspiracy. On audio. Margaret closed her notebook. And now, we finally have enough evidence. I looked at the photographs of my father hanging on the wall of my apartment. We're almost there. Marcus nodded. No, we're exactly where we wanted them. Because in less than 2 weeks, the board would gather for its annual meeting. Charles believed he was about to become the most powerful man in the company. Victor believed he was about to become CEO. Neither of them knew. The quiet security guard who opened doors every morning was about to walk into that boardroom, not as Adam Parker, but as Adrian Hayes, the rightful owner of Hayes Technologies. The day the truth walked into the boardroom, the morning of the annual board meeting finally arrived. For 6 months, I had worn a cheap security uniform. For 6 months, I had watched good people suffer. For 6 months, I had collected every lie, every threat, every stolen dollar. Now, it was time to end the game. I arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The building looked exactly as it had every morning. Employees rushed inside carrying coffee. Receptionists prepared for another busy day. Security guards checked badges. No one knew this ordinary Tuesday would become the most unforgettable day in the company's history. As I stood in the lobby, Frank walked over with a smile. Morning, Adam. Morning. You seem happier today. I smiled. I think today's going to be a good day. He laughed. I hope so. Neither of us knew it would be the last conversation we'd ever have as co-workers. At exactly 9 a.m., black luxury cars began arriving. Board members stepped out one by one. Charles Whitmore greeted everyone with confidence. Victor followed close behind. Both looked relaxed. Why wouldn't they? As far as they knew, the real owner of Hayes Technologies was still on medical leave. Inside the executive conference room, Charles stood at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a smile, before we begin, I have an important announcement. Every board member looked toward him. After careful consideration, I believe Adrian Hayes is no longer capable of leading this company. Several members nodded. Charles continued, for 6 months, he has abandoned his responsibilities. Our investors deserve stable leadership. I therefore recommend appointing Victor Lang as our new Chief Executive Officer. Victor pretended to look surprised. I appreciate your confidence, but this decision belongs to the board. The performance was almost convincing. Almost. Outside the room, I took one deep breath. Then I removed my security cap. For the first time in 6 months, I looked into the reflection of the glass door. The gray hair was gone. The fake beard had been removed earlier that morning. The glasses disappeared. The man staring back at me wasn't Adam Parker anymore. He was Adrian Hayes, the rightful owner of Hayes Technologies. I straightened my suit. Margaret stood beside me. You ready? I nodded. Let's finish what my father started. She opened the door. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. One board member actually dropped his coffee. Victor's face lost all color. Charles stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I smiled politely. Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting. No one answered. Finally, Charles forced a weak smile. Adrian, we weren't expecting you. I know. That was the idea. I slowly walked toward the head of the table. This seat, I looked at Victor, still belongs to me. Without saying a word, Victor stood up. I sat down. For several seconds, the room remained completely silent. Then Charles cleared his throat. Adrian, We were just discussing company performance. I know. I've been watching it very closely. Victor tried to recover. You've been away for months. I smiled. Have I? Margaret placed a black folder on the table. Inside were photographs, audio transcripts, financial reports, bank records, copies of anonymous letters, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. One by one, board members began reading. Their expressions changed from curiosity to confusion, then horror. Victor finally spoke. What is all this? I looked directly into his eyes. The truth. I pressed a small remote. A large television screen lit up. The first recording began playing. Victor's voice echoed through the room. Destroy them tonight. No one will ever know. The room became silent. The second recording played. Charles's voice. We'll remove Adrian permanently. Several board members turned toward Charles in disbelief. He immediately stood. Those recordings are fake. Marcus, sitting quietly near the back of the room, finally spoke. They've already been authenticated by 3 independent forensic laboratories. Charles's confidence disappeared. I pressed the remote again. The screen filled with financial records. Millions of dollars. Transferred into fake companies, luxury properties, private accounts. Everything linked back to Charles Whitmore. Marcus stood. $286 million. Stolen over 5 years. Every transaction has been verified. One elderly board member whispered. My God! Another simply removed his glasses. He couldn't bear to look. Victor suddenly slammed both hands on the table. You can't prove I personally took anything. I smiled. No, but someone else can. The conference room doors opened. Everyone turned. Richard Collins, the company's former financial controller, walked inside. Victor stared at him. You! Richard nodded. I'm done lying. He sat across from the board. For the next 40 minutes, he confessed everything. Fake invoices, shell companies, forged audits, destroyed contracts, threats, bribes, every crime, every meeting, every signature, every order. By the time he finished, no one in the room doubted the truth anymore. Charles made one last desperate attempt. This is ridiculous. I built this company with Richard Hayes. I stood. No. My father built this company. You simply waited until he was gone. Charles lowered his head. For the first time in 25 years, he had nothing to say. Then something happened that no one expected. Frank, the elderly janitor, knocked gently on the conference room door. I'm sorry. I didn't know the meeting had started. He looked at me, then froze. His eyes widened. Mister. He couldn't finish the sentence. I smiled warmly. Come in, Frank. The board looked confused. You know him? One director asked. Frank nodded slowly. He looks exactly like Mr. Richard. I walked toward him, then held out my hand. My name isn't Adam. It's Adrian Hayes. I'm the owner of Hayes Technologies. Frank covered his mouth. His eyes filled with tears. I knew. There was something different about you. I turned toward every board member. For 6 months, I worked beside the people you never notice. The cleaners, the receptionists, the warehouse staff, the security guards. I watched who treated them with dignity and who treated them like they didn't exist. I paused. My father used to say, the way you treat the person who cannot help your career tells the world exactly who you are. The room remained silent. Not one person dared interrupt. I looked at Victor. You're fired. Then at Charles. You'll be speaking with federal investigators before sunset. Security officers entered the room. This time, not to protect them, but to escort them out. Victor looked back at me, one final time. You planned all this. I shook my head. No. I simply listened. And while you were busy stealing money, I was learning the names of the people who truly built this company. As the doors closed behind them, the room erupted into applause. Not for me, for the truth. But my biggest decision was still waiting, because exposing corruption was only the beginning. Now, I had to decide who deserved to lead Hayes Technologies into the future. My father's legacy. The applause slowly faded. The conference room became silent again. Victor Lang and Charles Whitmore had been escorted out of the building in front of hundreds of employees. News traveled faster than anyone expected. Within an hour, Every floor of Hayes Technologies knew something unbelievable had happened. The quiet security guard was actually the owner of the company. People gathered in hallways. Some were crying, some were laughing. Others simply stood there, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. For 6 months, they had shared elevators, coffee breaks, and conversations with me, and not once had they realized who I really was. After the meeting ended, I asked every employee to gather in the main atrium. Nearly 2,000 people filled the building. Some stood on balconies overlooking the lobby. Others crowded around the reception desk. The room was completely silent as I stepped onto the small stage where my father used to give his annual speeches. I looked at the faces in front of me. Some were hopeful. Some were nervous. Some were afraid they would lose their jobs because of the investigation. I took a deep breath. My name is Adrian Hayes. A few people smiled. Others wiped tears from their eyes. For the past 6 months, I wasn't your CEO. I was your security guard. A wave of whispers spread across the room. I wanted to know what this company had become. I didn't want reports. I wanted the truth. I looked toward Frank. The elderly janitor stood near the back of the crowd. So let me tell you what I discovered. I discovered people who worked 12-hour shifts without complaining. I discovered receptionists who stayed late to help strangers. I discovered warehouse workers who treated every shipment as if it were their own. I discovered security guards who protected this building like it was their home. And I discovered managers who forgot that leadership begins with respect. The room erupted into applause. Then I raised my hand. The room became quiet again. Today, things change. No employee will lose their job because they told the truth. If you acted honestly, you have nothing to fear. But if you abused your position, if you bullied others, if you stole from this company, you should start looking for a lawyer. For the first time in years, people smiled without fear. The following week became one of the busiest in company history. Federal investigators occupied the executive floor. Dozens of offices were searched. Computers were seized. Financial records filled entire conference rooms. Marcus worked side by side with government forensic accountants. The evidence was overwhelming. Charles Whitmore had stolen nearly $300 million over 5 years. Victor had approved fake contracts. Kevin Brooks had manipulated employee evaluations. Several senior executives resigned before investigators even questioned them. Others were arrested. The empire of corruption collapsed within days. But removing bad leaders wasn't enough. I had promised myself I would rebuild my father's company. So I began with the people who deserved it most. The first promotion surprised everyone. I called Sarah Bennett into my office. She looked terrified. "I'm sorry if I made mistakes." I smiled. "You didn't." She looked confused. "I've watched you for 6 months. You returned lost money. You helped customers. You stayed late without asking for overtime. You treated everyone with kindness." She blinked. "I have. I know." I handed her a folder. She slowly opened it. Inside was a new employment contract. Director of Employee Experience. She looked at me in disbelief. "I've never managed a department." "I know, but you've already been leading people. You just didn't have the title." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you." "No." I smiled. "Thank you." Next, I visited Frank. He was cleaning windows exactly as he had every morning for nearly 30 years. "Frank." He turned around. "Morning, Mr. Hayes." I laughed. "Please. It's Adrian." He smiled. "I don't think I'll ever get used to saying that." I handed him a small envelope. "What is this?" "Open it." His hands shook as he unfolded the papers. His eyes immediately filled with tears. "I don't understand. You've worked here 29 years. Next month would have been your retirement." He nodded quietly. "I know." I smiled. "I've decided something. From today, you're retiring with full salary for life." He looked at me, speechless. "And one more thing." I handed him another document. "This building's employee training center will now be called the Frank Miller Leadership Academy." He covered his face with both hands. "No one's ever done anything like this for me." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "My father would have." David Morales became operations director. Emma Collins was promoted to executive communications manager. Carlos received financial assistance for his wife's medical treatment. Every promotion was based on one thing: character. Not politics. Not favoritism. Not fear. Exactly the way my father believed it should be. 3 months later, Hayes Technologies held its first company-wide celebration in years. Families filled the campus. Children laughed. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Music echoed through the gardens. It looked exactly like the celebrations my father used to organize. As the sun began to set, I stood on the stage. My father believed companies don't belong to buildings. They belong to people. The crowd applauded. So today, I want to introduce our new mission. Behind me, the giant screen lit up. One sentence appeared. Success means nothing if respect is missing. The employees stood. Applause filled the entire campus. Some people cried. Others hugged each other. For the first time since my father's death, Hayes Technologies felt alive again. Later that evening, Margaret walked over carrying an old leather notebook. My father's notebook. She smiled. I think this belongs with you. I opened the final page. There was one sentence I had never noticed before, written in faded ink, almost hidden at the bottom. One day, this company will belong to my son. I hope he remembers that people are always more valuable than profit. I closed the notebook slowly. Looking across the campus, I saw Sarah laughing with her team, Frank dancing with his grandchildren, David helping a new employee, Emma introducing her parents to coworkers. For the first time, I wasn't looking at employees. I was looking at family. 1 year later, Hayes Technologies was named America's best place to work. Employee turnover dropped by 90%. Profits reached record levels, not because we worked people harder, but because people finally believed in the company again. Journalists often ask me the same question. Mr. Hayes, why did you spend 6 months pretending to be a security guard? I always smile before answering. Because a CEO can learn more from one honest conversation in the hallway than from 100 meetings in the boardroom. They usually nodded, but only I knew the real reason. I wasn't trying to discover who deserved promotions. I was trying to answer one question my father left behind. Who will protect my company when I'm gone? After 6 months, I found the answer. It wasn't one person. It was every honest employee who chose integrity over power. And as I walked through the lobby one last time, I looked at my old security uniform displayed inside a glass case. A small plaque beneath it read, "Never judge a person by their uniform. True leaders earn respect by how they treat others." I smiled, because that old uniform had taught me more about leadership than any billion-dollar office ever could. The end.